The bridge of the Grit of Soul was silent except for the steady beep of the countdown timer. On the main screen, Silva Prime hung in the void, a world still half swallowed by the gray and black stain of the swarm. No one spoke. Captain Lee Jun stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Park Min-ji watched the numbers fall with the intense focus of someone who had built the bomb. Dr. Choi, Hyein monitored the planetary sensor readings. Sergeant Kim Tae-shik stood at his station, a silent statue. 10 seconds. 5. The timer hit 0. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a point on the night side of the planet, at the location of the brain node, glowed. It was not a bright, explosive flash like in old videos. It was a deep, angry pulse of light that swelled from within, like a star being born in fast motion. The light was so intense it washed out the sensors for a second, and the shockwave began. Not just in the atmosphere, but in the swarm itself. The vast, connected network of black material convulsed. The gray, consumed zones seemed to ripple. The visible swarm masses on the surface thrashed like beheaded snakes, their movements becoming uncoordinated. Chaotic, the pulse of light faded, leaving a terrible, glowing scar on the planet's surface. Dr. Choi's sensors chirped. Catastrophic energy release confirmed. The blast pattern is messy. It is not a clean sphere. The swarm mass around the node attempted to contain it, to absorb it, and was vaporized from the inside out. The chain reaction is propagating through the neural connections. On the screen, they watched as the darkness began to come apart. Without the central node to direct it, the swarm lost its purpose. Patches of it simply stopped moving, dissolving into inert dust. Other parts lashed out blindly, consuming each other in a frantic final hunger. The gray stain did not vanish quickly, but it began to break apart like a rotten cloth, revealing tiny, fleeting glimpses of the planet's original surface beneath Dot. It was not a pretty victory. It was a brutal surgical amputation performed with a nuclear axe. Days later, the Grit hovered over a different part of Silva Prime. This was a valley that had been on the very edge of the swarm's advance. The ground was still gray and dead, but the creeping blackness was gone, reduced to flaking ash. On the ground, the humans were working. But they were not fighting. Min-ji was operating a large, noisy terraforming rig. It was an ugly machine that chewed up the dead topsoil, injected it with a cocktail of hardy Terran bacteria and nutrient slush, and spewed it out the back in damp, dark clumps. It was the opposite of Valinari elegance. It was crude, loud, and effective. Nearby, Sergeant Kim was using the Grit's cargo crane to place massive, prefabricated water filtration units on a riverbank. The river was sluggish and full of gray silt. The units would scrub it clean, not with delicate energy fields, but with sand, charcoal, and violent aeration. Dr. Choi was on her knees, wearing simple environmental gear. She was taking samples of the new soil. She planted a fast-growing, tough earthgrass seed in a patch. The pioneer species, she explained to a group of watching Valinari, their lights flickering with cautious curiosity. It holds the soil. Then other things can grow. It is how life on Earth recovers from fire and disaster. The Valinari watched all of this with a sense of profound disorientation. These beings, who had brought such terrifying violence, were now performing what could only be called an act of gentle, stubborn healing. Their methods were loud and physical. They got dirty. They repaired broken things by hitting them with tools until they worked. They were teaching the planet how to be stubborn, too. Counselor Luna approached Captain June, who was overseeing the work from a small hill. The gentle light of her recovering world softened the harsh lines of his face, but could not erase them. "Your methods are?" "Not what we expected," Luna said softly. June nodded, watching Min-ji curse at a stuck gear. We're not what anyone expects. We don't have the technology to fix your world the way it was. That's gone. But we know how to help something broken learn to live again. We've had a lot of practice on our own world. A priority communication alert chimed on June's wrist comm. It was a galactic consensus wideband signal, marked with the highest level of urgency. He accepted it, and a complex hologram assembled in the air before them. It showed the representatives of the major species, the Tosk, the Xyle, the Gron. Their expressions were a mix of awe, shame, and deep, deep fear. The Tosk spoke first, its voice hurried. Captain Lee June of Terra, the galactic consensus has witnessed the event at Silva Prime. The Devourer swarm has been neutralized. This act of decisive intervention has been noted. The Xyle representative's crystalline form shimmered. Our analysis of your tactical data is incomplete. The principles you employed defy logical optimization. Yet the result is undeniable. You have achieved the impossible. The Grand leader leaned forward, its massive form filling the image. You have strength of a kind we did not comprehend. Not just muscle, but will. The consensus is in agreement. A seat on the High Council is now open. We offer it to humanity. Your species unique? Perspective is needed. It was a historic moment. The ultimate acceptance. The end of their exile. June looked at the hologram, then at Luna, then at his team, who had stopped their work to listen. He saw Minji, covered in grease and dirt. He saw Dr. Choi, holding a clump of new soil like it was a treasure. He saw Sergeant Kim, quietly helping a Valinary child understand how to turn a valve on a water tank. He turned back to the waiting galactic leaders. "Thank you for the offer," he said, his voice calm and clear. "But we decline." The holographic figures flickered in stunned silence. Luna looked at him, her light pulsing in surprise. June continued, "We don't want a chair at your quiet table. Your table is for talking. We're not good at talking." He gestured to the valley, to the slowly healing world. "You called for help when no one else would. That means something to us. That's the only reason we came. So just keep the channel open." He paused, a faint, hard smile touching his lips. "And next time you have a problem that can't be solved by talking, something that needs breaking, call us sooner. We're good at breaking terrible things." He ended the transmission. The galactic leaders vanished. The quiet of the valley returned, filled with the sound of Minji's rig and the wind. Luna stared at him. "You refused them? For us?" "Not for you," June corrected gently. "For the call. You made it. We answered. That's the job." He looked at his crew and gave a short jerk of his head. "We're not done here. Let's get this water flowing." As they walked back to the worksite, a new direct data packet arrived on the Grid of Souls bridge. It was a priority channel code issued not by the full consensus, but by the Valinary Concord. It was a dedicated, secure line, bypassing all galactic bureaucracy. The label, assigned by Luna herself, was simple. It did not say Deathworlders. It did not say Terrans. It did not say soldiers. It read, the responders. When the report reached June on his data slate, he read it and showed it to Minji. She grunted, wiping her hands on her pants. "Catchy." Dr. Choi smiled. "Accurate." Sergeant Kim gave one of his small, rare nods. June put the slate away and picked up a shovel to help dig a trench for a water line. The name was good. It was a start. In a silent galaxy, someone had finally learned to call for help, and now they knew who would answer. The mood on the Grid of Soul was one of cold, focused tension. The banter was gone. Every crew member moved with a silent purpose. In the main hangar, a large, heavily modified missile sat on a launch cradle. It did not look sleek or advanced. It looked old and menacing, its surface marked with faded radiation warnings and welds that were functional, not pretty. This was the Hail Mary, a 20-megaton thermonuclear warhead, a weapon from a time when humanity only knew how to promise total ruin to itself. Min-Ji and her engineering team swarmed over it, installing a hardened penetration core and a new guidance system. On the bridge, Captain Lee Jun studied the tactical hologram of Silva Prime. The Valinari had provided their last, most precious piece of intelligence. Deep planetary scans showing the source of the swarm's cohesion. A massive biological structure buried in the heart of the largest consumed continent. They called it the brain node, a pulsing, thinking cancer that directed the hunger of the entire swarm. Destroy it, and the swarm would become mindless, disconnected patches, easy to mop up. Leave it alive, and it would simply regrow from whatever remained. The path to the node was a tunnel through a planet-sized enemy. The swarm density that was beyond anything they had seen, COUNCILL, or Luna's hologram, appeared on the bridge, her light flickering with distress. Captain, the data is clear. The area around the node has a swarm mass concentration of 98%. Your ship would be consumed in seconds. Your kinetic weapons would be absorbed by sheer volume before reaching the target. It is a geometric certainty of death. June didn't look away from the map. We're not going to fly through it, Counselor. We're going to fly to it. There's a difference. He traced a line on the hologram. The swarm reacts to energy and threat. We'll clear a path the only way we can, by giving it a bigger Messier problem to deal with somewhere else. A diversion. He turned to his team. Min-Ji, the secondary packages are ready? She nodded, wiping grease from her cheek. 6 heavy shrapnel dispersal bombs and 2 toxin sprayers on remote drones. They'll make a glorious, ugly mess at the southern pole. It should pull a significant mass away from the approach vector. But, Captain, it'll only buy us a window. A short one. That's all we need, June said. Tae-Shik, you're on point defense. The grit will be moving fast and low. Anything that gets past the drones and the diversion, you blast it into confetti. Not energy weapons. Use the railgun slugs and the fragmentation flak. Make it physically impossible for them to get close. Sergeant Kim gave a single solid nod. Understood. Dr. Choi, June continued. You're with me and Min-Ji on the drop. Once we plant the device, we may need to. Encourage it to stay planted. Your expertise on swarm aversion will be crucial. Choi adjusted her glasses. I have prepared several concentrated irritant aerosols. They are essentially the equivalent of pepper spraying a god. It may buy us seconds. The operation began with a scream of tearing metal and fire. The diversionary drones shot towards the southern pole, and minutes later, the horizon lit up with silent flashbulb bursts, followed by spreading clouds of metallic dust and greenish toxic fog. On the sensors, they watched as vast rivers of the black swarm mass shifted, flowing towards the disturbance, drawn by the violent insult. Go, June said. The grit of soul dropped into the atmosphere like a brick. It did not fly with grace. It used its massive engines to brute force its way through the thin air, a furious roaring speck diving into a sea of darkness. The ground below was not ground. It was a churning, living ocean of the swarm. The point defense railguns, under Kim's control, began to speak. They did not pew or zap. They thumped, a deep, rhythmic sound felt in the bones. Each shot was a canister, packed with thousands of tungsten ball bearings. They exploded just ahead of the ship, creating a storm of high-velocity shrapnel that shredded the rising tendrils and flying, drone forms of the swarm. It was not a clean kill. It was a butcher's work, filling their flight path with a haze of black particulate and dismembered chunks. "We are attracting full attention," Kim reported, his voice calm over the roar of the engines and the thumping guns. A larger form, a flying fortress of interlocked black plates, rose before them. Minji, strapped in at the engineering station, didn't wait for orders. She fired a mining laser, not to cut, but to superheat a section of the plating. Then she launched a kinetic torpedo, just a solid lump of steel. It hit the glowing spot, and the fortress shattered like glass under a hammer. The ship shuddered as something massive impacted the hull. "Breach in Sector 7. Contained." Someone yelled. "Don't slow down," June commanded. "The node is 15 kilometers ahead." They broke through the upper layers of the swarm ocean. Below, in a vast crater of its own making, sat the brain node. It was a mountain of throbbing, veined flesh the color of a bruise. It pulsed with a sick, dark light. Tendrils thicker than city blocks connected it to the planet, pumping consumed energy in and directions out. The sight was so biologically wrong, so viscerally horrifying. It made even the hardened humans feel a twist of nausea. The grit hovered, fighting against the turbulent, hot winds rising from the node. The launch bay opened. June, Minji, and Dr. Choi, in heavy hazard suits, rode a platform down on thick cables, the Hail Mary device hanging below them in a harness. The air was thick and acidic. Smaller, defender-type swarm creatures, like six-legged crabs made of bone and hate, scuttled towards them across the node's surface. Minji went to work immediately, using plasma cutters to bore an insertion point for the warhead. June provided cover with his heavy rifle, blowing the scuttling defenders apart. Dr. Choi sprayed her aerosols, creating a stinging, noxious fog that made the creatures writhe and retreat. The mental assault began not as a sound, but as a feeling that forced its way into their skulls. It was the swarm's final defense. It showed them images. Earth, not as a blue marble, but as a gray, consumed husk just like Silva Prime. It showed them their own bodies dissolving into the black paste. It filled them with a profound existential despair. A voice whispering that resistance was the joke of the universe. That consumption was the only end. Minji cried out, dropping her cutter, clutching her helmet. Dr. Choi froze, her eyes wide behind her visor. June felt it. The despair was a cold weight, but his mind did not break. He had seen too much, fought too long in the dark corners of space where hope was a scarce commodity. The image of Earth dying was terrible, but it was a fear he had lived with every day since first contact. It was not a new horror. It was an old companion. "Is that all?" He growled into his cum, his voice strained but clear. "We dream worse." He fired his rifle, the physical act anchoring him. "Minji, the device." His words were like a slap. Minji shook her head, a snarl on her lips. "You want to eat my home? Eat this." She grabbed the cutter and resumed her work, the plasma flaring brighter. Dr. Choi blinked, the clinical part of her mind reasserting itself. Fascinating. A psionic attack based on induced despair. A predator from a gentle galaxy. It uses fear. How predictable. She adjusted her sprayer and doused a creeping tendril in acid. With a final, heavy clunk, the warhead slid into the cavity Minji had carved. She armed it. A simple physical timer began its countdown from 10 minutes. Package delivered. She yelled. They were hauled back up, the cables whining in protest. As they rose, they could see the node pulsing faster, the dark light intensifying. It knew. It understood the physical object buried in its flesh was a death sentence it could not absorb or adapt to. The grit of Soul's engine screamed as it pulled away, climbing vertically out of the atmosphere. leaving behind a planet with a beating, radioactive heart about to stop. On the bridge, Sergeant Kim maintained a steady fire on the pursuing swarm forms until they were too small to target. No one celebrated. They simply watched the timer on the main screen count down. They had answered the call. The bill was about to come due. Without heading, the shuttle from the grid of Sol fell towards Silva Prime like a blunt stone. It was a bulky, armored lander, built for hard drops onto unimproved rock, not gentle descents into a forest. Inside, the human team sat in silence, checking their gear. Their armor was angular and thick, painted a dull gray. It was sealed and self-contained, designed for environments that were actively trying to kill their wearer. To the Valinari watching from orbit, they looked like ancient, angry spirits preparing for war. The landscape below was a nightmare of gray. Where once there had been a forest of singing, light-sensitive trees, there was now only a flat, dusty plain. It looked like the surface of a dead moon. Here and there, odd shapes of what might have been tree trunks stood like crumbling statues of Ashdod. The shuttle touched down with a hard thump, its landing struts crushing the brittle ground. The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. The air was still and silent. No wind, no insect hum, no rustle of leaves. It was the silence of a grave. The humans fanned out, their boots leaving deep prints in the dust. Sergeant Kim took point, his massive frame scanning the horizon with a heavy rotary, cannon held ready. Dr. Choi carried a sensor pack and a collection of sample probes that looked like sinister needles. Min-ji carried a heavy toolkit and a demolition backpack. Jun walked in the center, his eyes on his helmet's tactical display. Spread is confirmed. Dr. Choi's voice came through the comms, calm and clinical. Biomass conversion is 100% complete. This is not a dead ecosystem. It is a consumed one. The energy has been taken. They moved towards a cluster of the ash tree shapes. As Kim approached, his foot knocked against a half-buried piece of Valinari tech, a small, crystal data terminal. It was gray and inert. Then the ground moved. It was not an attack from a creature. It was as if the ground itself woke up. The flat, gray dust coagulated, pulling together into a shifting black paste. It rose in tendrils and waves, silent and swift. From within the paste, forms emerged. They were not shaped like animals, but like rough copies of things the swarm had consumed, jagged approximations of Valinari limbs. Sharp spikes that might have been branches, all made of the same oily. Darkness. Contact, Kim said, his voice flat. He fired. The rotary cannon did not make a bright energy bolt. It made a deafening, grinding roar. Heavy slugs, designed to pierce asteroid rock, tore into the forming swarm mass. The effect was immediate and violently different from the Valinari recordings. The swarm did not absorb the kinetic energy. The slugs tore through it, blasting chunks of the black material into vapor and spraying sticky fragments for meters. The swarm mass recoiled, the tendrils thrashing. "It's working!" Min-ji shouted, her voice full of fierce joy. She didn't fire a weapon. She primed a small, blocky device from her pack and hurled it into the center of the pooling mass. Magnetic shrapnel charge. Fire in the hole. The charge emitted a low hum, then detonated. It wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a storm of white-hot, ferromagnetic needles. They ripped outwards in a sphere, physically shredding the swarm into a cloud of black confetti. The mass collapsed, the pieces wriggling on the ground before slowly dissolving back into dust. But more was coming. The gray plain for hundreds of meters around them was now stirring, flowing towards them like a black tide. Defensive ring. "Choi, get your sample now," Jun ordered, firing his own weapon, a heavy-caliber rifle that punched fist-sized holes in the advancing forms. Sergeant Kim planted his feet. Becoming an immovable bunker, the stream of fire from his cannon creating a wall of destruction. Dr. Choi, protected by the chaos, moved quickly. She extended a long mechanical probe towards a smaller, isolated patch of swarm. The probe jabbed into it and took a core sample, sucking the black material into a sealed canister dot as she retracted it. A swarm creature, shaped like a charging beast with too many legs, broke from the tide and lunged at her. Kin swiveled, but he was covering another angle. June's rifle barked, blowing off a limb, but it didn't stop. Dr. Choi didn't flinch. She raised her other arm, which held a canister with a nozzle. "Feeding time," she muttered, and sprayed a jet of milky liquid directly into the creature's open maw. The effect was instant and grotesque. The creature convulsed, its form losing cohesion. The black paste sizzled and bubbled, turning a sickly green before melting into a foul-smelling puddle. The swarm tide pulling towards them hesitated. "Botulinum derivative," Choi reported, examining her sensor. "A neurotoxin. It doesn't like being poisoned. It has no biological defense because nothing in its experience has ever tried to poison it before." The swarm stopped its mindless advance. The remaining patches of blackness pulled back, coalescing about 50 meters away. They watched, the humans' weapons still trained on it. The silence returned, heavier now. Then, the swarm began to change again. The black paste hardened, taking on a glossy, shell-like appearance. It formed interlocking plates, like the segments of an armadillo or the carapace of a beetle. A new form rose from the center, a hulking, low-slung thing covered in this hardened armor. It was clearly designed to deflect kinetic impact. Min-ji whistled. "Will you look at that?" It learned. On the orbital feed, Consular Luna felt a plunge of despair, so deep it almost extinguished her light. Adaptation. That was the swarm's ultimate terror. You could surprise it once, but it learned. It evolved countermeasures. The human's brutal solution had just been rendered obsolete. On the ground, June did not sound despairing. He sounded almost satisfied. "Good," he said, his voice crackling over the cones to the orbital observers. "It's learning our language. It just learned the word for armor." He motioned to his team. "Disengage. Back to the shuttle." "Captain, we can take that thing," Min-ji argued, hefting a larger charge. "Not the point," June said, already walking backward, covering their retreat. "We didn't come down here to win a fight. We came to have a conversation. We just taught it 2 new words, impact and poison. It just replied with hard shell." He reached the shuttle ramp. Time to teach it a word it can't counter. Back in the shuttle, as it rose on pillars of flame from the dead zone, June opened a secure channel to the grit of soul. "Orbital command, this is June. The test is complete. The swarm adapts to kinetic and chemical attacks by hardening. Standard escalation is ineffective." He paused, looking at the faces of his team, streaked with sweat and grit inside their helmets. "Authorization is requested for Project Hail Mary. I repeat, request authorization for the use of the strategic asset." There was a long silence from the ship. The strategic asset was not a piece of standard equipment. It was a relic, a thing kept in the deepest, most shielded vault of the grit, not as a weapon, but as a historical lesson and a last, terrible resort. A new voice came over the channel, the weary voice of the grit's executive officer. "Authorization confirmed, Captain. Use code Delta Omega. The asset is yours." June leaned back in his seat. He looked at Min-ji. "You know what to do, Chief." Min-ji's face, which had been set in a scowl of frustration, transformed. It was not a smile, but the look of an artist given a monstrous final canvas. "The planet cracker," she breathed. "The old uranium core fission fusion cocktail. It doesn't deliver energy neatly. It just..." violently disagrees with the existence of matter in its vicinity. Dr. Choi nodded slowly. A total spectrum energy burst combined with catastrophic physical disruption. It is the opposite of consumption. It is instant, wasteful annihilation. There is nothing to adapt to. Sergeant Kim was simply cleaning his weapon, piece by methodical piece. The plan had changed. The tool had changed. His job had not. The shuttle docked with the grit. As they walked back into the brighter, louder human ship, the weight of what they were about to do settled on them. They were not going to perform surgery. They were going to remove the cancer with a tactical supernova. June stopped before entering the bridge. He looked at his team, these children of a violent, beautiful, stubborn world. They ignored their call, he said quietly. Now we answer, not with a whisper, with a bang that will echo through their quiet galaxy for 1,000 years. Let's get to work. The grid of soul tore through the void, its engines pushing well past their safety limits. Inside, the mood was not one of heroic fervor, but of focused, grim preparation. The Valinari distress call played on a loop in the tactical briefing room, but the humans were not listening to the words of despair anymore. They were studying the data embedded in the signal-to-sensor readings of the swarm. Captain Lee Jun, Engineer Park Min-ji, Dr. Choi Ha-yan, and Sergeant Kim Tae-shik watched the main screen. It showed the swarm in action. A graceful Valinari city ship, its hull like woven light, fired a brilliant lance of plasma. The beam struck the black, shifting mass of the swarm and was simply absorbed, the darkness seeming to pulse with a stronger, more violent energy afterward. Every energy weapon they have makes it stronger, Minji said, her voice flat. She chewed on the end of a stylus. It's like feeding a fire. Their ships are built for harmony. No sharp edges, no kinetic weapons, no mess. Dr. Choi zoomed in on a scan of a single swarm unit. The consensus reports label it a bioenergy harvester. It breaks down complex life and technology at the molecular level and absorbs the energy. It is the perfect predator for the galactic consensus. Their whole civilization is based on clean energy transfer and delicate balances. This thing eats that for breakfast. Sergeant Kim spoke, his voice a low rumble. So we hit it with something it can't eat. Something with no food. June nodded. Exactly. They tried a scalpel on a tumor. We need a hammer. A dirty, rusty hammer. He turned to Min-ji. The Grits fabricators. What can we make that is stupidly simple, physically destructive, and offers zero energy gain? A sharp grin spread across Min-ji's face. It was the look she got when presented with a beautiful, brutal engineering problem. Kinetic kill vehicles. Big rods of tungsten. We slam them into the swarm at a fraction of light speed. No energy signature to absorb, just pure, wasteful kinetic impact. It'll be like throwing mountains at them. Messy. She was already pulling up schematics. And we have those old mining charges from the asteroid belt ops. They're just shaped chemical explosives. Boom, heat, and shockwave. The swarm can't eat a pressure wave. Dr. Choi raised a finger. There is another avenue. The swarm is a biological system, however alien. It consumes. What if we give it something? Indigestible? Something actively poisonous? She brought up another file, this one from Earth's own databases. Images of toxic fungi, venomous reptiles, and radioactive waste sites flashed on the screen. Our world is full of things that kill by being consumed. We could weaponize that principle. Create a payload that is a biochemical insult. The plan was taking shape, ugly and effective. It was the opposite of Valinari strategy in every way. Where they sought perfect defense, the humans planned aggressive, targeted violence. Where they used elegance, the humans embraced crude force. The Valinari refugee fleet was a heartbreaking sight. A few dozen ships, each a work of art, hung in the space near a barren moon. Their graceful lines were scarred and dark. The grid of Sol, with its angular armor and weapon pods, looked like a wild predator that had stumbled into a gallery of stained glass. Docking was a tense, quiet affair. The Valinary air was thin, fragrant, and slightly cool. When the airlock cycled open, the human team stepped into a wide, softly lit chamber. A group of Valinari waited. They were tall, willowy, their skin emitting a gentle bioluminescence that now flickered with anxiety and grief. Counselor Luna stepped forward. Up close, her beauty was ethereal and fragile. She bowed gracefully. "Captain Li Jun, your arrival is a shock to us. We thank you for hearing our call." "We answer when we're called," Jun replied simply. His voice, normal to his own ears, sounded like grinding gravel in the quiet chamber. He introduced his team. Minji gave a short, sharp nod, her eyes already scanning the Valinary ship's elegant, exposed crystal circuitry with a look of professional horror. Dr. Choi offered a small, polite smile that didn't reach her analytical eyes. Sergeant Kim simply stood, his presence somehow making the large room feel small. A Valinari military officer, his light tinged with blue, brought forward their primary infantry weapon. It was a sleek, white staff that generated a shimmering energy blade at one end. "Our most powerful close defense tool," the officer said, a note of pride still in his voice despite everything. "It can cut through any known material." Sergeant Kim looked at Jun, who gave a slight nod. Kim stepped forward. He took the weapon. It was light, almost insubstantive in his hand. He examined it for a moment. Then, without any dramatic wind-up, he placed one hand on the staff and the other near the emitter, and bent it. There was a sharp crack as the crystalline focus shattered, and the energy blade died with a fizzle. The metal staff was now a V-shape. Kim handed the ruined weapon back to the stunned officer. "It would break," he said in his quiet rumble, "if you hit something with it." The silence in the chamber was absolute. The Valinari looked at the broken weapon, then at Kim's placid face, then at their own delicate hands. The difference was not just in strength, but in fundamental understanding. Their technology was an extension of their philosophy: precise, efficient, non-destructive. The human's first instinct had been to test its limits through pure, applied force. Later, in a briefing room that seemed too softly lit for the discussion at hand, Jun laid out their plan on a data slate. He showed Luna the schematics for the tungsten rods, the chemical explosive charges, and Dr. Choi's proposed toxin caster missiles. Luna's light dimmed in confusion. "You propose to fight the consuming darkness with physical objects? And poison? This is primitive. It creates debris. It is uncontrolled. It creates shrapnel," Minji corrected, her patience thin. "Debris is a byproduct. Shrapnel is the point. Your energy beams are a neat, closed system. The swarm opens that system and takes lunch. A piece of metal moving at high speed doesn't have a system. It's just a fact. The swarm has to deal with the fact." Dr. Choi leaned forward. "Counselor, your people are from a world of gentle competition. On Earth, life doesn't just compete. It wages chemical warfare. Plants release toxins into the soil to kill rivals. Animals carry venom that liquefies organs from the inside. We are proposing to speak to the swarm in a language life on Earth has been fluent in for billions of years, the language of toxicity." Luna looked at the harsh lines of the human weapons, then out a viewport at her dying world. The elegant logic of her people had led to extinction. This human logic was brutal, inelegant, and horrifying. But it was logic of a kind. "You fight a consuming fire," Jun said, his tone final. "We don't try to blow it out with more air." We choke it on something it can't digest. We make it sick. We make it hurt. It was the word hurt that seemed to penetrate Luna's despair. The Valinari had never conceived of hurting the swarm. They had only thought of stopping it or escaping it. The idea of actively causing it pain was alien, almost blasphemous. And yet, a tiny, desperate spark ignited in her eyes. "How do we begin?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We need a test," June said. "A small engagement. We need to see if our vocabulary is understood." He pointed to a map of Silva Prime. "Here, a swallowed forest zone. The swarm there should be dormant, digesting. We go down, we say hello." The team moved to leave. As they walked back to the airlock, passing Valinari who shrank back from their heavy steps and loud voices, Sergeant Kim paused. He looked at a group of Valinari children, their light faint and fearful, huddled behind an adult. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a ration bar, a dense brown brick of nutrients. He broke off a small piece and held it out on his broad, calloused palm. The children stared. Kim didn't smile. His face was incapable of such an expression. He just waited. Finally, the bravest child reached out and took the piece. It sniffed it, then took a tiny bite. Its light flickered in surprise at the bland, hearty taste. Kim gave the rest of the bar to the adult, gave the smallest of nods, and turned to follow his crew. It was not an act of grand compassion. It was a simple, practical gesture. The strong feed the weak. To the humans, it was basic. To the watching Valinari, it was a profound, confusing puzzle. These terrifying creatures from the death world had just shared their food. The gentle light of Silva Prime's twin suns filtered through the crystalline canopy of the council spire. Inside, Counselor Luna stood at the great observation window. Her slender silver form seemed to blend with the soft glow of the room. Below, the world was a masterpiece of peace. Rivers of liquid light wound through forests of singing trees. Cities were grown, not built, their structures harmonizing with the gentle hills. It was a world that had never known a scream, only songs. Now, a silent scream was tearing through the galaxy. On the horizon, a stain was spreading. It was not a cloud or a shadow, but an absence. Where it passed, the vibrant blue of the ocean turned to a flat, gray dust. The lush green of the forests vanished, leaving behind a barren, lifeless plain. It moved with a terrible, hungry patience. This was the Devourer swarm. For 3 lunar cycles, the Valinari had fought with all the tools of their advanced civilization. Elegant energy beams, capable of melting starship armor, were absorbed by the swarm like rain into sand. Sonic harmonizers, designed to shatter rock, caused only a faint ripple. Each act of defense only seemed to feed the enemy. Luna's long fingers trembled as she activated the communication console one final time. The holographic symbols of the galactic consensus floated in the air. The swift Tosk, the crystalline Xyle, the hulking Gron, one by one. Their responses played, each a variation on a single, chilling theme. The swarm is a universal entropy. Engagement guarantees extinction. We mourn your future loss. The Tosk representative's image flickered away. Our analysis indicates a 0.01% chance of successful resistance. We cannot justify the expenditure of resources. Our thoughts are with you. The Xyle's crystal lattice dimmed. The Gron's message was the bluntest. A massive armored being spoke, its voice a low rumble. We are strong, but we are not foolish. To fight the swarm is to throw your body into a star to cool it. We will guard our own borders. Your call goes unanswered. Luna deactivated the console. The room was silent except for the distant, soothing hum of Silva Prime's core fields, a sound that was now a mockery. Her aide, A younger Valinari named Kale approached. His light was dim with despair. The final broadcasts have ended, Counselor. The consensus is silent. The swarm will reach the primary continent in 4 rotations. Luna did not turn from the window. Is there no record? No forgotten protocol? Nothing from the early days of expansion? Kale was quiet for a long moment. There is. One file. It is classified under the highest restriction level. Category: Apocalyptic Risk. Title: Deathworld Contingency. Terra. The word hung in the air. Terra. A name spoken in whispers. A lesson for young Valinari on the dangers of cosmic evolution. A world of such violent extremes, such rampant predation and geological rage, that the consensus had deemed its native species a force majeure and act of galactic chaos, not a civilization. Contact was minimal. Observation was passive. And a wide exclusion zone was maintained. The humans, Luna whispered, the word feeling strange on her tongue. The file suggests that in a scenario where all conventional logic fails, where the enemy operates on principles unknown to peaceful biology, they might be considered. Kale's tone made it clear he considered this less a strategy and more a form of cosmic suicide. Luna watched the darkness grow on the horizon. She thought of the songs of her world, soon to be silenced forever. She thought of the gentle logic of the consensus, which had chosen collective cowardice over collective action. A terrible, illogical resolve hardened within her. If they were to die, let it be while attempting something. Anything, no matter how insane. Prepare the last scout ship, she said, her voice suddenly firm. Strip it of everything non-essential. Pour all remaining power into the jump drive. Plot a course for the Sol system. Counselor. Kale began, his light pulsing with alarm. We have asked the galaxy for heroes. Luna interrupted, finally turning to face him. Her light was not bright with hope, but sharp with a final, desperate edge. None came. We have no more heroes to ask for. So we will not ask for heroes. We will ask for the monsters. Dispatch the ship with my plea. Address it to anyone who will listen. The orbital dock above Mars was a noisy, grimy symphony of human industry. The UN deep space vessel Grit of Sol was clamped in its service harness like a worn-out tool being sharpened. Sparks from repair drones cascaded down its armored flanks, which were marked with the faint scars of micrometeorites and particle abrasion. It was not an elegant ship. It was blocky, functional, and built to endure. On the bridge, Captain Lee Jun scrolled through a patrol log on his data slate. His face was calm, but lines of permanent tiredness were etched around his eyes. His career had been a parade of first contacts that turned into misunderstandings. Border skirmishes over resources the galaxy found worthless and long. Quiet stretches of being pointedly ignored by the so-called civilized species. The Grit was often sent to places where the risk was high and galactic interest was zero. They were the cleaners, the fixers, the ones you called when you needed a problem smashed. Not solved with talk. The door hissed open, and Chief Engineer Park Min-ji floated in. A large wrench magnetically clamped to her thigh. She was studying a schematic on a wrist projector, her brow furrowed. The port plasma injector is being a stubborn piece of junk again. The galaxy sells us alloy that can't handle a simple heat cycle. I'll have to reline it with something meaner. Just make it work, Min-ji, June said, not looking up. We have a patrol sweep in the Kuiper Belt in 72 hours. More listening posts to check. Maybe we'll get lucky and hear a rock cracking in half. The excitement might kill us. Dr. Choi Hai-in entered next, her movements precise. She carried a small sample case. Captain, I've finished the analysis of the extremophile bacteria from Europa. Their metabolic process is fascinating. They consume sulfur and radiation and excrete a corrosive acid as a byproduct. In a closed environment, they'd dissolve a standard Grand freighter in a week. A useful trait, Doctor, June said dryly. Noted in the ways Earth life is terrifying file. Maybe one day it'll be a party trick. Sergeant Kim Tae-shik was already on the bridge, having arrived silently minutes before. He stood by the tactical station, a solid, immovable presence. He was running a diagnostic on the ship's point defense cannons, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy over the controls. He didn't speak. He rarely did. His silence was often mistaken for dullness by outsiders. But the crew knew it was a watchful, patient quiet. The routine was shattered by a sharp, discordant alarm from the sensor station. It wasn't the alert for an unidentified contact, but a priority distress ping on a galactic emergency band, a band no human ship had ever received a call on. "Captain," the comms officer said, voice tense with confusion. "We're receiving a focused, high-priority distress signal. Origin point. Just outside the solar system. It's on the consensus emergency channel." June was at the station in an instant. "Put it on screen." The main viewer flickered. The image was grainy, shattered by static. It showed the interior of a ship that looked organic, with smooth, flowing lines. Now, those lines were cracked and scorched. A being of soft, silver light stood before the viewer. It was clearly injured, its form flickering. The voice that came through was layered with static and a depth of emotion that needed no translation. It was pure, undiluted despair. "This is Counselor Luna of the Valinari Concord, aboard the scout vessel Last Whisper. Our world, Silva Prime, is dying. The Devourer swarm consumes all. We have asked the Tosk for shelter. We have asked the Xyle for wisdom. We have asked the Grand for strength. We have asked the galaxy." The image flickered violently as the ship shuddered. "For heroes." Luna's luminous eyes seemed to look directly at June. "None came. Our calls are met with silence. Our logic has failed. Our hope is gone." There was a long pause, filled only with the groan of dying metal. We ask the children of Deathworld for mercy. We do not ask for heroes. We ask for you. Help us, or we are gone forever." The transmission ended. The bridge was utterly silent. The hum of the ship's systems, suddenly very loud, got every protocol. Every galactic diplomatic guideline screamed at June to refer this to Earth Command, to await instructions, to form a committee. Contact with the besieged core world was a political earthquake. But Earth Command was 20 light minutes away. The Valinari ship, from its trajectory data now flashing on screen, would lose power and life support in minutes. June saw the faces of his crew. Min Ji's jaw was set, her eyes already calculating jump coordinates and power transfers. Dr. Choi's expression was one of intense, clinical interest. Sergeant Kim had turned from his station, his placid eyes now fixed on June, waiting for the order. They had all heard the same thing. Not a political plea. A cry in the dark. He leaned into the comm. His voice was flat, calm, and carried the weight of a decision made not by a committee, but by a human being. "This is Captain Lee June of the United Nations Deep Space Vessel Grit of Soul. We read you. Your signal is received. Hold on." He took a breath, the words feeling both terribly heavy and perfectly simple. "We're coming." He turned to his crew. "Min Ji, get that injector fixed in 10 minutes or weld it shut and route from the secondary. Tae-shik, prep the Marine Bay for hostile environment deployment. Doctor, pull every file we have on xenobiology, toxicology, and